the testimony of JP, John Parodi. Oh, yeah. Well, I know that there's a few that hear that name and kind of cringe a little bit inside, and there's some that hear that name and think, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? What this man has put himself through and what he's endured is mind-boggling. You know, I had the privilege of meeting JP in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. Oh, I would say we're going back roughly about 10 years. And we were in a noon meeting of Narcotics Anonymous, and I remember seeing JP because I've never seen him there before. You know, I'd been attending this meeting for some time. And I was sitting close to the door because it was that season of where I was introducing myself to people and giving people hugs as they enter in and exit the door. I love to do that. You know, now I know why the good Lord made me so big, so I can wrap my arms around people and love them. And I'm so grateful for that. So getting back to this day, I remember seeing JP. He was sitting against the wall underneath a little window. And I couldn't even really look at him for too long because, well, let's just say he looked like he was a couple shades away from dying. Like, he was bad. His eyes were riddled with road maps of veins that looked like they were going to pop out of his eye sockets. His body was absolutely deformed. He looked like he's been in pain for some time. I mean, he looked in bad shape. And he didn't share in the meeting. I had shared earlier. And then at the tail end of the meeting, I went to use the restroom. And then the meeting ended up closing. And everybody excused themselves and left the meeting. And so as soon as I got out of the restroom, I ended up passing by JP, which was walking towards his car in the parking lot in the front. And I introduced myself to him. And I asked him, you know, what's your story, buddy? And he had just shared his name. And I told him that I had a gym that was down the street. And he said, I live blocks from your gym, Michael. I said, you do? He said, yeah, if you say your gym is where it is on the corner of Brookhurst and Bishard and Huntington Beach, a block from the beach, I live a few blocks from there. And I said, well, why don't you come see me sometime? I would love to get to know you. So, I think it was about 9 days later, I was in my studio, and I was training at the time a gal that owned a magazine called Great Taste, and I was doing a photo shoot for Great Taste. There was 2 gals in there, and they were getting ready to take a photo shoot of me because they wanted to do this article about me. And it so happened I looked outside right after we started the photo shoot, and I saw JP, but at this time I didn't remember his name. And I said to the lady, stop, we need to stop. And I ran outside, and I ran up to JP on his bike. I said, hey, bro, how are you? And he said, I'm okay. Which I think he was lying. And I said, are you here to see me? He says, yes. I said, well, this is great news. Come on in. Could you give me about 15 minutes? I'll finish this photo shoot, and you wait in my office inside my gym. Just sit down. And so when I got back into the studio, the 2 gals, I said, well, listen, he's here. And I didn't know he was going to come, but it's now that he's here, like, we have 15 minutes to finish this photo shoot. And they said, Michael, we have 2 hours planned for this photo shoot. I said, 15 minutes is all I got because he's here. And they kept asking, well, who's he? I said, we'll find out. We'll find out. About 20 to 25 or so minutes later, I was in the office now, sitting across from JP, and we started talking on that particular day. And JP thankfully opened up and shared his great sadness with me. You see, about a decade earlier, JP had asked his best friend's wife if he could take her husband to Bali, Indonesia, to go surfing for 2 weeks for his 40th birthday party. And she agreed, and she said, that's fine, just make sure he gets home safely. And then he also asked his kids, like, hey, I'm going to take your dad surfing for a couple weeks for his 40th birthday party in Indonesia and Bali. The gentleman that he was taking, his name was Steve Webster. Well, the problem is that when they got to Bali, there happened to be a terrorist attack. Matter of fact, John talks about the very first time having to leave the bar because he was too drunk in his life. And this is a man that used to drink and used to party. Like, he can hold his own for sure. When he went to his hotel room, which is a few blocks away from the bar that Steve Webster and a few other people were at, that a bomb went off and happened to kill Steve Webster. And all JP had shared about was running towards the bomb, completely out of his mind, because he was so hammered and out of it. I think he said he took some pills before he went to sleep to try to sleep and be okay. But the reality is that he said it was like a war scene, that he was seeing bodies and people with missing limbs and so forth. He said it was just unbelievable. But he never found his buddy, and he stayed there several more days searching and looking for his buddy until he came across a young man that knew who Webster was by his identity, by his picture, and said that your friend did perish. So JP never wanted to leave Bali without his friend. And so that ate him up alive. He felt responsible for that, even though it wasn't his doing. He didn't know that there was going to be a terrorist attack and that his best friend was going to perish. He had no idea. But the reality is he couldn't live with himself. So he started drinking and doing drugs more. He started gambling, doing day trades, and just he became a very, very hardcore and bad drug addict and alcoholic. He started like losing things. So by the time I met JP, he had basically lost almost everything except his dog and his house, which he owed plenty of money to the bank to. He had hit his bottom, and his great sadness was eating him alive, and his story that he didn't share with anybody. So eventually he shares it with me, and I took a liking to JP right away. Anyways, we started on this recovery journey together. In the next several years, JP and I did life together. You know, there was a time where JP was spending several hours a day with me, whether it be going to meetings or at the beach or walking and talking or working out. Like, we did a lot of things together. JP is a rare bird. There's no doubt about it. Either you love him or you hate him. You know, he had a sense of humor that I understood, and the problem is he was very direct with people, and he has pissed off a lot of people in the past. But thankfully, JP owns all his stuff. And eventually JP ended up getting baptized and giving his life to Christ. The problem was JP wanted to separate himself from the rooms of recovery for the most part. He didn't want to be part of the AA program. So in lieu of that, he had relapsed multiple times. You know, in the several years that I hung out with JP, there were multiple times where he did try to take his life. And boy, that was heavy. I'll never forget the time where I just got done training with several guys in the evening, on a particular evening, a few years after meeting JP, and Coach, the gentleman that I was sharing with you earlier about in another video, the pastor of Seaside Community Church, which is a good friend of mine, he ended up leaving his workout and only to coming back to the house about an hour later to inform me that he got a call from somebody informing him that JP tried to take his life in an apartment down the street. You know, this is a man that has teetered with death multiple times. I mean, there's a handful of times where he has attempted to take his life because his pain inside was just too hard and too difficult to deal with. So I'm grateful that God put me in his life. You know, there were times where I wanted to stray and be away from JP just because it was so difficult to carry the message of hope and to love him on a continuous basis, you know, with what he has done to himself and to others. But deep down inside, I have to tell you that JP has one of the most amazing sense of humors out there. He's brilliant. He's too smart for his own good. You know, in lieu of all the times that I've tried to help JP, there's been a half a dozen or so times that his father and I would go and try to rescue him, and whether it be at a house or whether it be at a motel or what have you, or an apartment. I think I've moved JP at least a half a dozen times in the last decade. You know, it's been a few years since I've had to move JP because he finally got his act together, and he's turned out to be quite a wonderful human being. And I know how much he loves the Lord. You know, he's a work in progress, this man JP. And I'm so thankful and grateful that the good Lord allowed me to continuously stay by his side through thick and thin. You know, my wife had shared with me one time, she said, if you abandon JP, where's he going to go? Like there's no one left, Michael. You're it. You're all he's got. And there were times where it was difficult. Because I'm not going to lie, JP hurt me on several occasions. You know, whenever he attempted to take his life or he relapsed, I mean, you know, I take that stuff personal sometimes, even though I know I'm not supposed to. But when you're committed to somebody, heart, mind, and soul, and you're invested like very deeply into people, like I was with JP, like it's hard not to take. Like it's difficult at times to watch the pain and suffering that people go through, whether it be from drug addiction or mental illness or whatever the case may be. You know, I think JP's been to the mental ward a couple times. It's only by God's grace that he's alive. It's only by God's grace that he never killed anybody that I know of. It's only God's grace that he's still sober today. And he's got a desire to seek after God wholeheartedly. Like, what a wonderful thing. What a beautiful thing. So this is my testimony of JP. Listen, if JP can stay sober, then you can too. This man was bad. Like, he was off the charts bad. But the reality is God has redeemed him, just like he can redeem you and I. He's already redeemed me. I'm thankful and grateful for his presence and his ability to do so. So, JP, I'm a better man for knowing you. You haven't been easy to deal with, but boy, oh boy, it's been a pleasure to do life with you. I love you, brother. I pray a blessing over everything it is you do. And just know that we will always be connected, not only in this life, but the life to come. Amen. I love you, brother. Keep fighting the good fight. Hallelujah.